Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the 13 years of the last Labour government, there were no national NHS strikes. If the Prime Minister had negotiated with the nurses before Christmas, they wouldn't be on strike. If he'd negotiated with the ambulance workers, they wouldn't be on strike either. So why is he choosing to prolong the misery rather than end these strikes?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear that we want to have constructive dialogue with the unions. That is also why, when it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies. But now the honourable gentleman simply doesn't have a policy when it comes to this question. If he talks about wanting to end the strikes. The question for him is simple then. Why does he not support our minimum safety legislation? We all know why. We all know why, Mr. Speaker. It's because he's on the side of his union paymasters, not patients.
Mr. Speaker, when I clapped nurses, I meant it. His response to the greatest crisis in the history of the NHS is to threaten to sack our nurses. His Transport Secretary says it's not the solution. His Education Secretary hopes it won't apply in schools. His own assessments say it could increase the number of strikes. The simple truth is you can't legislate your way out of 13 years of failure. Between 2010 and 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID, Prime Minister, the number of people stuck on the NHS waiting list doubled. Why do patients always wait longer under the Tories?
Whoa. This is the new year. I want to start off with the refreshed chamber, but certainly not by interruption. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the minimum safety legislation. Let's just talk about it a little bit further, because this is a simple proposition that no one denies the union's freedom to strike, but it is also important to balance that with people's right to have access to life-saving healthcare at the same time. Mr. Speaker, this shouldn't be controversial. This shouldn't be controversial. The International Labour Organization supports minimum service levels. They're present in France, in Italy, in Spain. Normally, he's in favour of more European alignment, Mr. Speaker. Why not now?
Mr. Speaker, they've gone from clapping the nurses to sacking the nurses. It's that simple. And to add insult to injury, they're the cause of the crisis. His government commissioned a report on waiting times. He knows this. His own report says this is not a COVID problem, it's 10 years of managed decline. As a result, 7.2 million people are now waiting for treatment. He says he wants to be held to account over that. So let's be very clear. Is his promise merely to get those numbers back to where they were before COVID, that's 4.6 million, or back to where Labour had them in 2010, almost half of that? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, again, let's just start with the facts. The honourable gentleman seems to completely ignore the fact that not just in England, but in Scotland and in Wales and in many other European countries, COVID has had an extraordinary impact on health services. Now we have a very clear plan to bring the waiting list down, and it's one that the NHS supports. But I tell you what the NHS doesn't need. What they don't need is Labour's idea. What they don't need is Labour's only idea, which is for another completely disruptive, top-down, unfunded reorganisation buying out every single GP contract. Now, these aren't my words, Mr. Speaker. The CEO of the Nuffield Trust said it will cost a fortune and it's out of date, just like the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, so he can't tell us how much he'll reduce waiting lists by or when. So much for accountability that he wants. as ever with this Prime Minister, you scratch the surface and you find there is nothing there. Last month, 1.4 million people waited more than 4 weeks for a GP appointment. When Labour left government, you were guaranteed an appointment in 2 days. When does the Prime Minister expect to get back to that?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to waiting lists, we've already eliminated 2-year wait lists, done last year. We're on track. We're on track this spring to eliminate those waiting 18 months, with a clear plan to go further, to eliminate those waiting 52 weeks by next spring. And we're doing that with record funding, more community diagnostic centres, more surgical hubs and more patient choice. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I've made tackling wait lists one of my 5 priorities. But what are his? They seem to change every single week. Right? That first, he was against NHS outsourcing. Now, he's apparently in favour of it. He's inconsistent, unprincipled, and in hock to his union.
I wonder if Order. Can I just remind the Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions, not opposition questions. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the Prime Minister saying he's now registered with an NHS doctor, so he'll soon enjoy the experience of waiting on hold every morning at 8 a.m. to get a GP appointment. But I can tell him that those that are waiting now don't want another round of empty promises or boasting about what he's done. They just want to know when they'll be able to see a doctor. And this is not just about routine care. There could be nothing more terrifying than being told you might have cancer. That's why the last Labour government brought in a guarantee you'd been seen by a specialist within 2 weeks. Today, 50,000 people are waiting longer than that. 50,000. And everyone in this House will appreciate the anxiety that they're feeling. So when will cancer patients once again get the certainty of quick care that they got under Labour?
Mr. Speaker, why is there a challenge with cancer times right now? I tell you, again, it's just absolutely no understanding of the situation, Mr. Speaker. What happened to cancer referrals during COVID? They went down by almost 2/3, Mr. Speaker. That was because of a pandemic that they went down. And by the way, if we had stayed and listened to him, we'd still be in lockdown and there'd be a bit more waiting list, right, Mr. Speaker? But actually, right now, there are record levels of cancer treatment as we catch up with those missed things. But he talks about what's terrifying, Mr. Speaker. What's terrifying is right now. What's terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and Canada and the US, they ban strikes on blue light services. We're not doing that. All we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care. Why is he against that, Mr. Speaker?
There's not a minimum level of service any day because they've broken the NHS. And he's not promising that people will get to see a doctor in a few days like they did under Labour. He's not promising that cancer patients would get urgent treatment as they did under Labour. He's not even promising an NHS that puts patients first like it did under Labour. No, he's promising that one day, although we can't say when, their record high waiting lists will stop growing. And that's it. After 13 years in government, what does it say? But the best they can offer is that at some point they might stop making things worse.
Right, Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the NHS, it's crystal clear. The Conservatives on the side of patients, Labour on the side of their union paymasters. Mr. Speaker, I've laid out my priorities for the country. Waiting lists down, inflation down, debt down, growth up, and the boat's stopped, Mr. Speaker. All he does is flip from one thing to another, and that's the difference between him and me. He's focused on petty politics. I'm delivering for Britain.